My name is Lauren Whitaker, and I'm 33 years old. I work as a senior financial compliance analyst in San Francisco, which means I spend my days finding the small inconsistencies people hope no one will notice. I never imagined the most important one would be handed to me by my own father. He walked into my apartment on a Monday evening, dropped a printed bill onto my kitchen counter, and tapped the total with one finger. $20,000. Your brother needs tuition, a dorm, a laptop, and a meal plan. He said it as though he were reading the weather. You're the oldest. Paying it is your job. I looked at the page, then back at him. There was no request in his voice, only an order disguised as family duty. I had already helped my parents with insurance, home repairs, and more temporary emergencies than I could count. This time, I slid the paper back across the counter. Find someone else. His face tightened. He warned me that selfish choices had consequences, then walked out without saying goodbye. 3 days later, I stopped by my parents' house to return a box of holiday decorations. Before I reached the living room, I heard my father speaking behind the half-closed dining room door. Relax. We'll corner her at Christmas dinner. My mother laughed. She won't say no in front of everyone. Then my younger brother said something that made every number on that bill feel like a trap instead of an expense. I stepped away before they saw me. They believed Christmas would make me easier to control. What they didn't know was that I had spent my entire career following money, documenting lies, and waiting until people committed themselves to their version of the truth. On December 25th, they placed that bill in front of the entire family, and their plan collapsed before dessert. Before I show you how their Christmas trap fell apart, tell me, what time is it where you are? Where are you watching from? And what's the weather like there? Does it match your mood today? I'm curious to see how far my story will travel. My father's name was Richard. My mother's was Elaine, and my younger brother was Ethan. In our family, Richard made declarations. Elaine softened them with guilt, and Ethan waited to see how everything turned out. For years, I had convinced myself that arrangement was simply old-fashioned. Standing in the hallway with their Christmas plan still echoing behind the door, I finally admitted what it really was: a system. They had assigned me the role of the dependable daughter because dependable people were easier to invoice. I didn't confront them that night. Part of me wanted to burst through the door and expose everything I had overheard, but my professional instincts were stronger. People who expected an emotional reaction were rarely prepared for an audit. I went home, placed the $20,000 bill beneath the lamp on my desk, and studied it as though it had come from a client. The school logo was slightly blurred. The tuition line used a different font than the housing line. The document listed a premium meal plan the university's public website didn't even offer. The laptop charge was approximately $3,000, yet it listed no vendor, model, or tax. At the bottom, a sentence claimed payment was due before Christmas, even though the university's academic calendar showed the next payment deadline wasn't until January. None of those details proved fraud on their own. Together, however, they told me the document had been assembled to create urgency. The next morning, I called Ryan Morales, my cousin and one of Ethan's closest friends. Ryan had helped Ethan move into campus housing and had mentioned months earlier that Ethan had received a merit scholarship. I kept my question simple. Did Ethan ever show you his actual student account? Ryan went quiet. Why? Dad handed me a $20,000 bill and told me to pay it. He let out a slow breath. Lauren, Ethan told me the remaining balance was around $6,000. That number matched the university's published tuition estimate after the scholarship. Ryan remembered. I asked whether he had any proof. He hesitated, not because he wanted to protect a lie, but because he was tired of being dragged into Ethan's problems. Finally, he forwarded a screenshot Ethan had sent him while complaining about money. The student portal showed an outstanding balance of $6,240. It also listed a merit scholarship and a payment from something called the Lawson Family Education Trust. The trust's name stopped me cold. Our grandmother had created that fund years earlier to help her grandchildren pay for college. When I attended college, my father told me the fund was too small to help me, and that preserving it for emergencies was the responsible thing to do. I worked nights, took out student loans, and graduated believing I had protected my family from financial hardship. If the trust was now paying Ethan's expenses, why was anyone demanding $20,000 from me? I called my Aunt Margaret, my father's older sister, and the only relative who had ever challenged him without apologizing afterward. She was the co-supervisor of the trust, although Richard handled the routine statements. Margaret, do you know how much the trust paid toward Ethan's tuition this semester? Her silence was different from Ryan's. It was the silence of someone unlocking a drawer they hadn't opened in years. It should have covered $12,000, she finally said. Richard told me the transfer was completed in August. Ryan's screenshot shows a transfer, but Ethan still owes $6,000. Dad is demanding $20,000 from me. None of it makes sense. Can you send me the latest trust statement? I'll request it from the bank, she replied. But Lauren, don't accuse anyone until we know where the money went. I agreed. After we hung up, I examined the bill again and noticed a faint gray box beneath the total. Someone had pasted the number over the original amount. When I enlarged the scanned image, I could just make out the edge of a 6 hidden beneath the 2. That evening, Ethan called me. His voice was upbeat, almost rehearsed. Dad said you're stressed about the school payment. I get it. 20 grand sounds like a lot, but it would really take the pressure off everyone. Send me the official invoice from your student portal. I can't access it right now. You sent Ryan a screenshot yesterday. The cheerfulness vanished. Why are you talking to Ryan about me? Because the numbers don't match. He immediately accused me of treating him like a criminal. I told him I was treating the bill like a document. Then I asked one question. What is the extra $13,760 for? He didn't answer. Instead, he said, Christmas was supposed to be about family, and hung up. By the end of that day, I understood 2 things. Ethan knew the bill was false, and my parents expected the dinner table to do what the document could not. They believed an audience would make me obedient. I decided an audience would make the truth impossible to bury. 2 days later, Aunt Margaret called as I was leaving work. She had received a transaction summary, not the full statement, and what it revealed was worse than a simple inflated bill. The Education Trust had transferred $12,000 for Ethan in August, just as she had expected. But 6 weeks later, Richard had authorized 2 withdrawals labeled educational reimbursement. One was for $8,500. The other was for $7,200. Neither payment had gone to the university. Your father said he was reimbursing costs he had already covered, Margaret told me. I trusted him because he was the acting trustee. Did he provide receipts? No, I didn't ask for them. Her voice carried shame, but the responsibility wasn't hers alone. Richard had built his authority on the assumption that questioning him was disrespectful. Even Margaret, the strongest person in the family, had learned to choose peace until peace became expensive. I asked her not to mention our conversation yet. Before I exposed anything publicly, I wanted to give my father one private opportunity to correct it. Not because he deserved protection, but because I needed to know whether he would choose honesty when no audience was forcing him to. I went to my parents' house that Saturday afternoon. Richard was in the garage polishing the hood of a recently purchased SUV. He had told everyone the vehicle was necessary because the old one had become unreliable. The temporary registration was still taped inside the windshield. We need to talk about Ethan's bill, I said. He kept polishing. I thought we settled that. You ordered me to pay it. That's not a settlement. He dropped the cloth onto the workbench. You always turn family matters into negotiations. And you always turn your decisions into my obligations. His jaw tightened. I placed a copy of Ethan's actual account balance on the hood between us. He owes $6,240. The trust already paid $12,000. Where did the rest of the $20,000 demand come from? For a fraction of a second, his eyes shifted toward the SUV. That glance answered more than his words. He said college costs changed all the time. He said Ethan needed a financial cushion. He said a good sister would care about reducing her brother's stress instead of interrogating him. When none of that worked, he reached for the oldest weapon in our family. After everything your mother and I sacrificed for you, this is how you repay us. The sentence pulled me back 17 years. I was 16, standing in the same garage, holding an envelope from a statewide academic competition. I had won $1,500. Richard congratulated me, then explained that Ethan needed new equipment for a summer sports program. He called it a temporary family loan. I handed over the check. No one ever mentioned paying me back. A year later, when I needed money for my college application fees, I worked extra shifts at a grocery store while my parents told relatives I was independent by nature. That memory had once filled me with pride. Now it looked like the first entry in a ledger I had refused to total. You didn't raise me so I could become your emergency account, I said. Richard stepped closer. Be careful, Lauren. Success has made you arrogant. No, success made me capable of recognizing a fake invoice. His expression changed. He had expected resistance, but not evidence. I lowered my voice and gave him the opportunity I had come to offer. Tell me the truth now. Cancel the Christmas ambush. Explain where the trust money went, and I'll let the family deal with this privately. He stared at me for several seconds, then smiled without warmth. There is no ambush. You're imagining enemies because you can't handle being asked to contribute. The garage door opened behind me. Ethan walked in carrying shopping bags from an electronics store. He stopped when he saw the real account balance lying on the SUV. What is this? He asked. You tell me, I said. Why does Dad need $20,000 when your balance is $6,000? Ethan looked at Richard before answering. That instinctive glance confirmed everything. The rest is for next semester, he said. The document says current tuition, dorm, laptop, and meal plan. Then Dad described it wrong. Richard immediately accepted the opening Ethan had given him. Exactly. It was an estimate. You're creating a scandal over wording. I pointed to the shopping bags. Is the $3,000 laptop in there? Ethan pulled the bags behind his leg. That's none of your business. It became my business when you put it on my bill. My mother appeared in the doorway and asked why I was ruining the weekend. She didn't ask whether the bill was real. She asked why I wouldn't let the matter go. That distinction erased my last doubt about her role. I picked up the papers. You have until Christmas morning to tell the family yourselves. Richard laughed. And if we don't, then I will. He told me no one would believe I had been mistreated after everything they had done for me. I walked past him without arguing. At the end of the driveway, Ethan called my name and warned me not to embarrass him in front of the family. I turned around. You're not afraid of being embarrassed. You're afraid of being accurately described. For the first time, neither of them had an answer. The week before Christmas, my family's group chat turned into a campaign. My mother posted old photographs and wrote about how grateful she was that her children always supported one another. Richard shared an article about successful adults helping relatives pay for college. Ethan added a message saying he was terrified financial problems would destroy his future. None of them mentioned my name, but every sentence pointed directly at me. Relatives responded with hearts, prayers, and words of encouragement. Then my Uncle Paul wrote, "Ethan is lucky to have a big sister who can help." My mother reacted with a heart before I had even finished reading it a second time. That was their strategy in miniature. Announce my generosity before I agreed to it, then make refusing look like betrayal. I didn't defend myself in the group chat. Instead, I saved screenshots and sent one message. "I look forward to discussing the complete financial picture together on Christmas." The conversation stopped for 3 hours. Aunt Margaret obtained the full trust records 2 days later. We reviewed them at my apartment with Rachel Morgan, a friend from work who specialized in internal investigations. Rachel wasn't the kind of friend who told me I was right simply because I was hurt. She challenged assumptions, separated facts from emotion, and asked what each piece of evidence actually proved. The records showed the trust had started the year with $39,600. $12,000 had gone legitimately to Ethan's university. The 2 later withdrawals, totaling $15,700, had been deposited into a joint account owned by my parents. From there, $9,400 was paid to an auto dealership. Another $4,800 went toward a contractor renovating their kitchen. The remaining amount was transferred to Ethan. Ethan had used part of it to pay the deposit on an off-campus apartment he didn't need because his dorm contract already covered the academic year. He had also purchased a high-end computer, not for required coursework, but for a gaming and content creation setup he had proudly shown off online. The missing trust money explained the fake bill. Richard wanted me to replace the money he had diverted before Margaret completed the annual accounting. If I paid the $20,000, he could cover Ethan's real balance, restore most of the trust, and preserve the appearance that nothing improper had happened. My parents' new SUV and renovated kitchen would remain untouched. Ethan would keep the apartment and the computer. I would absorb the cost and be praised for helping. Rachel arranged the documents in chronological order. "You need to decide what your goal is," she said. "Do you want an apology, repayment, distance, or public exposure?" Rachel asked. "All 4, I answered. Then I corrected myself. "No, I want the truth documented. The consequences can follow from that." That distinction mattered. Revenge driven only by anger could be dismissed as cruelty. Accountability supported by evidence was much harder to escape. Margaret wanted to confront Richard immediately, but I reminded her of his plan. He had chosen Christmas because he believed the family audience belonged to him. If we spoke too early, he would rewrite the story, claim it was all a misunderstanding, and tell everyone I had attacked him over a private bookkeeping mistake. We agreed to let him make his demand first. I prepared 3 folders. The first contained Ethan's actual student balance, his scholarship information, and the altered bill. The second contained the trust statements, bank transfers, and receipts connected to the SUV, the kitchen renovation, and the apartment. The third contained a letter ending every voluntary payment I had been making on my parents' behalf. For nearly 4 years, I had paid their supplemental insurance premiums and property tax installments whenever Richard claimed cash flow was tight. The total averaged $1,150 a month. I had never called it support because my parents preferred the word help, as though the payments appeared only occasionally instead of arriving like clockwork. I canceled the upcoming transfers and printed the confirmation. I also prepared a written boundary. I would not pay Ethan's tuition, replace money taken from the trust, co-sign loans, or respond to financial requests delivered through relatives. Any future contact with my parents would depend on repayment and a direct acknowledgement of what they had done. On Christmas Eve, Ethan called again. "You're really going to make Dad beg?" he asked. I asked for the truth. "He's under pressure." "So am I." "You can afford $20,000. That doesn't make it yours." His voice sharpened. "You care more about being right than about this family." I looked at the 3 folders on my table. "No, Ethan. I care enough about this family to stop financing its lies. He told me I would regret walking into Christmas dinner with that attitude. After we hung up, my mother texted that my father planned to make a special family announcement before dessert. She added, "Please don't create a scene." I replied, "I won't create one. I'll bring the records for the scene you already planned." Christmas morning arrived with no confession, no canceled dinner, and no apology. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, I placed the folders in my bag and drove to the house where I had spent most of my life, trying to earn a place that should have already been mine. This time, I wasn't going there to be accepted. I was going there to close the account. By the time I arrived, 11 relatives were already gathered in the living room. Coats covered the guest bed, music played from a speaker beside the tree, and the dining table had been arranged as though presentation alone could guarantee harmony. Richard greeted me at the door with a hug that lasted just long enough to look affectionate from across the room. "There she is," he announced, "our successful daughter." The word successful sounded less like praise than an estimate of available funds. Elaine kissed my cheek and whispered, "Please remember that today is about family." Ethan avoided my eyes. He was wearing a new watch and talking loudly about his plans for the coming semester. Aunt Margaret sat near the window, calm and unreadable. Rachel wasn't there. We had agreed the evidence didn't need an outside advocate. The records would speak for themselves, and Margaret could verify the trust. Dinner began normally. Richard carved the roast. Elaine asked everyone to share one thing they appreciated. Ethan described college as the hardest challenge of his life. When my turn came, I said I was grateful for clear records and second chances. Margaret lowered her glass to hide a brief smile. After the main course, Richard tapped his spoon against his glass. "I want to talk about something important," he said. "Ethan has worked incredibly hard, but education is expensive. As parents, Elaine and I have done everything we can. Now it's time for the next generation to carry its share of the family's responsibility." He reached beneath his chair and placed the altered bill on the table in front of me. "Lauren has been blessed with a successful career," he continued. "We're asking her to pay $20,000 for her brother's tuition, dorm, laptop, and meal plan." No one spoke immediately. The silence was exactly what he wanted. Every face turned toward me, and the demand became a performance of generosity I was expected to complete. Uncle Paul nodded. "That's a lot, but family helps family." My mother leaned toward me. "You don't have to decide this second, sweetheart. Just tell everyone you'll take care of it, and we can work out the details later." There it was, the corner they had planned. I placed my napkin beside my plate. "Before I answer, I'd like Ethan to confirm the amount." Ethan shifted uneasily in his chair. "It's roughly 20,000. College costs change." "What is the exact balance on your student account?" Richard interrupted. "This isn't an interrogation. It's a request for $20,000. Exact numbers are reasonable." Ethan looked around the table, searching for sympathy. "About 6,000 right now, but there are future costs." I removed the first folder from my bag and slid a copy of his account statement toward the center of the table. "The balance is $6,240. Your merit scholarship has already been applied. Your dorm and meal plan are already included. You also received $12,000 from the Lawson Family Education Trust." Uncle Paul picked up the page. My mother's hand froze around her glass. Richard recovered quickly. "The $20,000 includes next semester and emergencies." I placed the altered bill beside the authentic statement. "Then why does this document describe the amount as current tuition, dorm, laptop, and meal plan? Why was the original $6,000 total covered with a $20,000 total? And why does it claim payment is due before Christmas when the university's deadline is in January?" Ethan's face flushed. "I didn't make that document." Every eye turned to Richard. He laughed once. I created a family estimate. That's not a crime. I didn't call it a crime, I said. I called it false. Elaine stepped in. Lauren, your father may have formatted it poorly, but his intention was to protect Ethan. Do you really have to humiliate him over a spreadsheet? I gave him a private chance to explain. He chose this table. Aunt Margaret spoke for the first time. Richard, where is the rest of the education trust? The room changed. Until then, several relatives had treated the conflict as nothing more than a disagreement between siblings. Margaret's question revealed a second layer, and Richard knew it. The trust is fine, he said. Then answer her, I replied. It began the year with $39,600. $12,000 went to Ethan's university. What happened to the other withdrawals? Richard's eyes hardened. You had no authority to access those records. Margaret calmly set down her fork. I did. I'm the co-supervisor of the trust, and I requested them. My mother stared at her as though Margaret had broken an unspoken agreement. You went behind our backs. No, Margaret replied. I reviewed an account I'm legally responsible for. I opened the second folder. The first page showed the $8,500 withdrawal. The next showed the $7,200 withdrawal. Then came the transfers into my parents' joint account. I passed copies around the table. Paper moved from hand to hand, and with every page, Richard's control slipped a little further away. The money didn't go to the school, I said. $9,400 went to the dealership where Dad bought the SUV. Another $4,800 went to the kitchen contractor. The rest went to Ethan for an unnecessary apartment deposit and personal equipment. Ethan pushed back from the table. Dad said he'd replace it. With my money, I said. No, Richard snapped. With family money. Everything in this family is shared. Then why were the SUV and the renovation shared with you while the debt was assigned to me? He pointed at me. Because you can afford it. You sit there with your salary and your apartment and act as though you built everything on your own. I built it while you told me the education trust couldn't help me. Aunt Margaret turned sharply toward him. You told Lauren there was no money for her? Richard said nothing. I continued, my voice quieter now. I worked nights. I took out loans. I handed over scholarship money as a teenager because you said Ethan needed it more. For years, I paid your insurance and property taxes because you said you were struggling. All the while, you treated my financial stability as a resource you could allocate without my consent. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but her words were still defensive. We were trying to keep everyone afloat. You were trying to keep your lifestyle intact. Uncle Paul stared at the dealership receipt. Richard, did you use trust money for the SUV? Richard folded his arms. I borrowed it. I intended to pay it back. When? Margaret asked. He glanced toward the altered bill. No one needed him to answer. The trap had collapsed. But the worst part for them wasn't that I had refused to pay. It was that everyone could now see what my payment had been designed to hide. Richard tried to regain control by standing. He said private finances had no place at Christmas and accused Margaret and me of turning a temporary loan into a public execution. But the authority in his voice no longer matched the room. My relatives were no longer looking at me as the ungrateful daughter. They were looking at him as the man who had presented a false bill to conceal money he had already taken. Elaine reached for the emotional escape. Lauren, even if mistakes were made, exposing this in front of everyone is cruel. I met her eyes. 3 days after I refused, I heard you laugh when Dad said you would corner me at Christmas because I wouldn't say no in front of everyone. You chose the audience. You just expected it to work in your favor. Her face went pale. Ethan stared down at his plate. Margaret asked him directly whether he knew the $20,000 amount was false. At first, he claimed he didn't understand how the trust worked. Then he admitted Richard had told him to describe every possible expense and round everything up. When Margaret asked about the apartment deposit, Ethan's story unraveled even further. He confessed that he wanted to move off campus with his friends and believed Lauren would eventually pay because she always does. Those 3 words hurt more than any accusation. They also set me free. My generosity hadn't created gratitude. It had created expectation. I removed the 3rd folder. As of this week, I've ended the insurance and property tax payments I've been making for Mom and Dad. I won't pay Ethan's tuition balance, replace trust money, co-sign a loan, or finance any future emergency created by dishonesty. Any contact about money must be in writing. Richard's anger finally broke through. You can't punish your mother because you're angry with me. I'm not punishing either of you. I'm ending payments that were always voluntary. We'll lose our coverage, Elaine said. You have income, a new SUV, and a renovated kitchen. You'll need to decide what you can afford, just as I've always had to. Margaret then announced that Richard was suspended from managing the education trust effective immediately. She would send the records to the family attorney, require a full accounting, and demand repayment of every non-educational withdrawal. Until that happened, she would approve only direct payments to accredited schools. No money would pass through Richard or Ethan. Ethan asked whether the trust would still cover his remaining balance. Margaret answered calmly, "The trust already supported you. The money spent on your apartment and equipment will be counted as part of your educational benefit. The rest is your responsibility." His expression collapsed. Without the extra funding, he couldn't keep the off-campus apartment, the premium setup, and the carefree lifestyle he had promised his friends. He would have to stay in the dorm, return what he could, and find a job to cover the remaining balance. None of those consequences threatened his education. They threatened only the image he had tried to buy with other people's money. Richard told Margaret she had no right to embarrass him. Uncle Paul reminded him that he had just tried to embarrass me into paying a fabricated obligation. Another relative asked whether Richard had ever used trust funds before. The question spread around the table, and his reputation, the thing he had protected more carefully than the trust itself, began to fracture. My mother started crying. For years, tears had ended difficult conversations in our family because everyone rushed to comfort her before asking what she had done. This time, no one attacked her. But no one changed the subject either. Richard followed me into the hallway as I picked up my coat. "You've made your point," he said quietly. "Now give me 30 days. Pay the $20,000 and I'll return it after I sell something." "No. If the attorney sees everything, Margaret will destroy my name. You withdrew the money? You created the bill? You planned the dinner? Your name is facing the consequences of your own choices." He lowered his voice even further. "I'm your father. That should have made me safer with you, not easier to use." Ethan appeared behind him and asked whether I felt proud. "I feel finished," I replied. I left before dessert. Through the front window, I could still see my family sitting around the table, surrounded by documents. No one was shouting. They were reading. That was the consequence my parents had never expected. They could survive my anger by calling me emotional. They could survive my refusal by calling me selfish. What they couldn't survive was a room full of people comparing their story to the records. I didn't ruin Christmas. I ended the performance. The formal accounting took 6 weeks. It confirmed that $15,700 had been removed from the education trust for expenses that didn't qualify. With fees and missing documentation included, Richard was required to repay $17,260. He sold the SUV, postponed the rest of the kitchen renovation, and used part of his savings to restore the trust. Margaret became the sole manager, and every future payment went directly to the school. Ethan returned the apartment deposit and sold some of his equipment. He stayed in the dorm, took a weekend job at the campus library, and arranged a payment plan for the remaining $6,240. His life didn't collapse. The fantasy that everyone else was responsible for maintaining it did. My parents did lose something important: access to me without accountability. I didn't visit for 3 months. I stopped answering messages that began with guilt, money, or demands that I move on. Elaine sent photographs from happier years. Richard sent short messages explaining that he had been under pressure. Neither message included an apology. Neither received a response. The $1,150 I had been sending them every month stayed in my account. I used part of it to pay down my student loans faster and placed the rest into a fund for a future home. The first month felt strange. I kept expecting an emergency phone call that would pull me back into my old role. When it never came, I realized how much of my life had been organized around preventing consequences for other adults. Ethan eventually wrote me a real letter. He didn't blame our parents, his friends, or the cost of college. He admitted that he had treated my success like family property and my boundaries like obstacles. He apologized for helping create the false bill and for expecting the Christmas audience to silence me. I replied once. I told him forgiveness was possible. Financial support was not. Trust would be rebuilt through consistent choices, not speeches. Months later, we met for coffee. The conversation was awkward but honest. That was far more valuable than the easy closeness we had pretended to share before. Richard never offered the same accountability. He told relatives I had overreacted over a loan, but the record still existed, and his version of events no longer controlled the family. He was never trusted to manage shared funds again. Elaine stopped asking me to rescue him. For the first time, they had to solve their own financial problems within the limits of their actual income. People often imagine revenge as a dramatic act that makes the person who hurt you suffer immediately. Mine was quieter. I refused the bill. I documented the truth. I stopped subsidizing the people who had mistaken my love for permission. Then I stepped aside and let their own decisions become expensive. The $20,000 stayed mine. More importantly, so did my voice. That Christmas taught me that family loyalty without consent isn't loyalty, it's control. Helping someone can be generous, but being forced to finance dishonesty only teaches people that manipulation works. Boundaries don't destroy healthy relationships. They reveal which relationships depended on you having none. So tell me this. If your family placed a false obligation in front of you and called it love, would you pay to keep the peace, or would you let the truth change the table forever? We hope this story gave you something meaningful to carry with you. It is entirely fictional and was created solely for storytelling and educational purposes. We hope it reminds you that some people will never give you the explanation you deserve, but you can still give yourself the closure, respect, and fresh beginning you need.